Ladies and gentlemen, in our culture, family is often idealized as a source of unconditional love, protection, and belonging. But for many, that narrative doesn't match reality. Behind closed doors, family can be a breeding ground for shame, control, betrayal, and emotional pain. In Brené Brown's voice, rooted in vulnerability, truth-telling, and deep research, this conversation dives into the hidden wounds we carry when blood ties become sources of harm instead of healing. It's not about blame. It's about breaking silence, reclaiming your worth, and learning that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from the people who say they love you but don't show it. We grow up steeped in the belief that family means everything, that blood is thicker than water, that no matter what happens, the people we share our DNA with will love us, protect us, and stand by us. But for so many of us, that promise of family loyalty comes with strings attached. The love becomes conditional. The acceptance hinges on compliance. And before we even know how to name it, we begin internalizing the idea that love must be earned through silence, sacrifice, or self-abandonment. This is where things get painful, because when you're a child, and the people who are supposed to protect you are the same people who harm you emotionally or manipulate your reality, you don't think there's something wrong with them. You think there's something wrong with you. Love, when weaponized, doesn't look like love at all. It looks like guilt. It sounds like obligation. It feels like a constant anxiety in your chest, a fear that if you say the wrong thing or set a boundary, you'll be punished, not physically maybe, but emotionally, through coldness, withdrawal, or rejection. And the hardest part is, most families who do this don't even see it. They call it tough love. They say they're just trying to help. They insist they're only doing what's best for you. But the truth is, they're often doing what's best for the family's comfort, not your individual well-being. They're maintaining a status quo where no one has to be accountable, where no one has to look in the mirror and confront how deeply their behavior has hurt someone they're supposed to love. This kind of dynamic thrives on shame. Shame that tells you you're ungrateful. Shame that whispers you owe them everything. Shame that says you can't walk away from your family. What kind of person does that make you? And because this shame is so deeply embedded, often reinforced by culture, religion, and even therapy at times, we stay in relationships that erode our self-worth. We stay quiet when we should speak up. We become the emotional punching bag, the scapegoat, the fixer, the peacekeeper, and in doing so, we betray ourselves over and over again in the name of love. Real love, healthy love, doesn't demand your silence. It doesn't ask you to keep secrets that corrode your spirit. It doesn't punish you for needing space, for having emotions, for growing into someone who no longer fits the mold they created for you. Love doesn't shame, love doesn't control, and love certainly doesn't hinge on how obedient, agreeable, or useful you are. When families use love as a weapon, what they're really doing is enforcing loyalty through fear. Fear of being excluded, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being the bad guy in a story you didn't write but are expected to carry. It's especially hard when you're the one who starts waking up, when you begin to realize that this version of love, this painful performative loyalty, isn't love at all. It's conditioning, it's control, and when you try to set boundaries or change the dynamic, you become the threat. Suddenly you're too sensitive. You're causing drama. You're the one who's changed. But what they don't see or refuse to see is that growth isn't betrayal. Healing isn't rebellion. It's survival. So many people stay stuck in toxic family dynamics because they're afraid of being alone. They fear what it means to walk away from people they've always called home. But the truth is, home is not where you're manipulated, minimized, or emotionally injured. Home is where you are safe, where you are seen, where you are free to be your full authentic self without fear of punishment. And sometimes that means you have to create a new definition of family, one that's based on mutual respect, empathy, and accountability. There's a myth that to be a good son, daughter, sibling, or parent, you must always put family first. But putting family first doesn't mean sacrificing your mental health, your peace, or your truth. It doesn't mean staying in relationships that diminish you. It means honoring connection, but not at the cost of your own soul. And it starts with telling the truth that sometimes the most hurtful people in your life share your last name, the truth that you can love someone and still walk away. The truth that blood may connect you biologically, but it doesn't entitle anyone to access your heart if they haven't earned it with care, consistency, and compassion. What we need to understand is that the deepest wounds often come from the people who were supposed to love us the most. And pretending otherwise doesn't protect the family, it just prolongs the pain. When we allow love to be twisted into a weapon, we lose ourselves. But when we reclaim our voice, when we set boundaries, when we stop equating love with suffering, we begin to heal not just ourselves, but potentially the generations that come after us. Because the cycle ends when even one person is brave enough to say, "This isn't love. Not like this." Shame is one of the most powerful and corrosive forces in human experience, and there's no environment more fertile for its growth than a family system that depends on silence. In families where dysfunction is normalized and truth-telling is seen as betrayal, shame thrives in the darkness. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It tells us that we are the problem, not the pattern. It convinces us that speaking up will make things worse, that naming the pain will destroy everything. And so we learn to stay quiet, to play our part, to carry the emotional weight of generations who never learned how to confront their own pain. The most dangerous aspect of shame in the family system is how invisible it is. It's rarely addressed directly. Instead, it lives in the subtle cues, the looks, the dismissive comments, and the way conversations shift when the truth edges too close to the surface. A child expresses sadness and is told to stop being dramatic. A teenager questions an unfair rule and is labeled disrespectful. An adult finally sets a boundary and is met with, "After everything we've done for you?" These aren't just words, they're coded messages that say, "You're not allowed to feel. You're not allowed to ask questions. You're not allowed to be different." And over time, those messages calcify into shame, not just about what you did, but about who you are. Family shame is particularly insidious because it hides behind love. The people inflicting the shame are often the same ones who say they care, and in many cases they do care, deeply, but their way of caring is tangled up in unresolved trauma, control, and fear. When families don't know how to deal with their own vulnerability, they project it onto the most emotionally honest member. That person becomes the scapegoat, the one who feels too much, who can't let things go, who brings up the past. But in reality, that person is often the one telling the truth that everyone else is trying to bury. This pattern doesn't begin with you. It likely didn't even begin with your parents. Shame in families is generational. It's passed down through behaviors, unspoken rules, and silent agreements. If your mother was never allowed to cry without being punished, she may struggle to hold space for your emotions. If your father was told that talking about problems was weak, he may shut down or lash out when you try to express yourself. And so the cycle continues, not out of malice, but out of learned survival. People protect what they know, even when what they know is hurting them and those they love. What's especially heartbreaking is that family shame often disguises itself as tradition, culture, or discipline. In many households, speaking about abuse, addiction, or dysfunction is not just discouraged, it's forbidden. It threatens the image of the family, the illusion of perfection, and that illusion becomes more important than the people inside it. In those environments, silence isn't just expected, it's enforced. And when silence becomes the rule, shame becomes the language. The emotional toll of this kind of system is immense. You learn to suppress your instincts. You second-guess your experiences. You wonder if maybe you are too sensitive, too reactive, too selfish. You internalize the belief that your needs are a burden and that your truth is dangerous. And because the system rewards compliance, you may even be praised for being quiet, for not making waves, for being the easy one. But deep down, there's a dissonance, a sense that something is wrong, that you're living a version of yourself designed to survive, not to thrive. The irony is that the people who carry the most shame often become the ones most desperate to hold the family together. They overfunction. They try to fix everything. They absorb the emotional labor of everyone else, while denying themselves the space to feel, rest, or even exist fully. But no matter how much they give, it's never enough to stop the dysfunction, because the system itself is broken, and you can't heal what you're not allowed to name. The way out of this dynamic is not through confrontation for the sake of conflict, but through truth for the sake of liberation. It begins with recognizing that your feelings are valid, that your memories are real, and that you are not responsible for protecting the image of a family that refuses to protect you. It means acknowledging that the silence you were taught to keep was never about peace. It was about power. And breaking that silence, while terrifying, is often the first act of real love you offer yourself. Healing from family shame doesn't mean destroying your family. It means dismantling the stories that kept you small. It means refusing to carry secrets that aren't yours. It means reclaiming your voice, even if it shakes, even if it's met with resistance. Because shame cannot survive being spoken, it cannot survive empathy, and it certainly cannot survive the light of someone who decides finally to tell the truth. Betrayal is one of the deepest pains a person can experience. And when it comes from your own family, it hits in places words can't reach. It's a rupture of trust in the very foundation that was supposed to hold you. What makes it harder is that this kind of betrayal often doesn't come in loud, explosive moments. It comes in subtle dismissals, emotional sabotage, or resistance to your growth. It comes when the people you expected to cheer for you turn silent. It comes when you start changing your life, setting healthier boundaries, and healing, and suddenly you become the enemy. The narrative of being supported unconditionally by family is powerful, but for many people it's just not true. Family can be threatened by the very things that are good for you, your confidence, your success, your independence, because those things disrupt the familiar dynamics they've come to depend on. There's a particular kind of pain that surfaces when you realize that your healing is what makes you unsafe to your own family. The version of you that tolerated dysfunction, stayed quiet, and didn't rock the boat, that version was easier for them to handle. That version helped maintain the system. But when you grow, when you start to say no, when you stop explaining or over-apologizing, it upsets the balance. Suddenly you're accused of being selfish, ungrateful, or distant. But what's really happening is that you've stopped betraying yourself to keep other people comfortable. You've stopped shrinking.
And the people who benefited from your smallness will rarely applaud your expansion. Families rooted in dysfunction often rely on unspoken rules to survive. Rules like don't talk about what's really going on, keep the peace even if it hurts, and don't challenge authority. These rules are not spoken, but they are enforced through guilt, silence, and emotional withdrawal. So when someone in the family starts doing things differently, going to therapy, setting boundaries, saying out loud what others only dare to whisper, that person is seen as dangerous. Not because they're doing anything wrong, but because they're threatening to unravel the stories everyone else is clinging to. When you tell the truth in a system built on denial, you become the problem. And that's where betrayal begins, not because you did something harmful, but because you refuse to keep pretending. There's also a complicated grief that comes with this kind of betrayal. You grieve the version of your family you hoped they'd be. You grieve the support you needed but never received. You grieve the fantasy of unconditional love. That grief is real, and it deserves to be honored. Many people try to skip over it, saying things like, well, that's just how they are, or at least they didn't mean to hurt me. But intention doesn't erase impact. And when we minimize our pain to protect others from accountability, we only deepen the wound. Sometimes the betrayal doesn't come from overt actions, but from the absence of action. The mother who stays silent when others mistreat you. The father who knows you're hurting but never asks why. The sibling who sees your pain and looks away. These moments are deeply wounding because they reinforce the message that your well-being is negotiable, that your emotional safety is secondary to family harmony. And for many, that lesson was learned early, being the child who didn't speak up because it wouldn't change anything. Being the teenager who stopped asking for help because no one ever responded. That history lives in the body and it shapes how we see ourselves and our worth. It takes enormous courage to confront this truth, to say out loud that the people who were supposed to nurture you instead nurtured dysfunction, that your growth threatens them not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're stepping outside a pattern they refuse to leave. You don't have to hate them to acknowledge the harm. You don't have to cut ties to honor your own healing, but you do have to stop expecting people to meet you at a depth they refuse to explore. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is accept who they are and still choose yourself. Healing from this kind of betrayal doesn't mean erasing the pain or pretending it didn't happen. It means validating your experience, grieving what was lost, and rebuilding trust within yourself. It means learning that you don't have to earn love by staying small or apologizing for your truth. It means realizing that the price of peace should never be your self-respect. When your growth is met with resistance, that's not proof you're doing something wrong. It's proof you're doing something brave. And bravery, especially in families that fear change, is often misunderstood as rebellion. But rebellion is not the goal. Integrity is. You can love people and still recognize that they don't know how to love you in the way you need. You can forgive and still maintain distance. You can grieve and still move forward. You don't have to wait for others to validate your journey. The strength it takes to keep showing up for yourself, even when the people closest to you don't understand, is a strength that builds a life rooted in truth, not in illusions. You are allowed to choose peace, even if it means disappointing those who are used to your compliance. Because the cost of betrayal by others will never be greater than the cost of continually betraying yourself. Control within family systems is often cloaked in concern, masked as love, and disguised as guidance. It doesn't always look like force. It often shows up in manipulation, guilt, silent treatment, and subtle emotional coercion. When we're raised in families where control is normalized, we don't even see it as control. We see it as love. We believe that being micromanaged means we're cared for, that being criticized means someone wants the best for us, that sacrificing our needs is part of being a good daughter, son, or sibling. And so the pattern continues, quiet, invisible, and deeply damaging. The need for control in families is usually rooted in fear. Fear of chaos, fear of change, fear of losing connection. For some families, especially those with unresolved trauma, control becomes the coping mechanism to avoid unpredictability. But in trying to create emotional order, they often sacrifice individual autonomy. And that's when things turn toxic. When your voice is silenced for the sake of peace. When your choices are judged through the lens of their fears. When love is given or withheld depending on how well you fit into the role they assign to you. These roles aren't accidental. Every family has its unspoken roles, whether it's the fixer, the golden child, the scapegoat, the peacekeeper, or the invisible one. These roles serve the family system, not the individual. And if you try to step out of that role, if you try to redefine yourself on your own terms, you become the threat, because your change forces everyone else to confront what they've refused to see. When you're no longer playing the part they expect, you're accused of abandoning the family. But what you're actually doing is reclaiming yourself. You're rejecting the illusion that love has to come at the cost of freedom. Control in families doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers, "We know what's best for you." It reminds you of everything they've done for you as leverage for obedience. It uses family gatherings to question your life choices under the guise of just asking. It withholds affection when you don't fall in line. It offers conditional support, then reminds you of that support every time you say something they disagree with. And in that environment, autonomy becomes rebellion, independence becomes disrespect, and boundaries become betrayal.
The moment you begin setting boundaries, the narrative shifts. You're seen as selfish, cold, distant. But the reality is, people who have benefited from your lack of boundaries will always see your boundaries as an offense, because boundaries strip away the unearned access they had to your emotions, your time, your life. And it doesn't take long before you realize that love in these dynamics was transactional. It was given when you complied and taken away when you didn't. That realization is heartbreaking, but it's also freeing. What makes this even more complicated is that many of these family members truly believe they are helping. They don't view their behavior as controlling. They see it as involvement. They see your autonomy as immaturity, your decisions as mistakes, your voice as attitude. And trying to get them to understand the difference between support and control often leads nowhere, because to them, letting go of control feels like letting go of love. They can't separate the two. And until they do their own work, which many never choose to, you will always be the one who has to carry the emotional labor of maintaining your sense of self. It's important to understand that this is not about blame. It's about clarity. You can hold compassion for your family and still refuse to be controlled by them. You can understand their fear and still honor your truth. You can love them and still say no. Because your life is not a group project. You are allowed to make choices that no one else agrees with. You are allowed to change, to grow, to evolve into someone your family doesn't recognize. That doesn't make you disloyal. It makes you human. The journey out of a controlling family system isn't easy. It requires you to redefine what love means. It forces you to separate your identity from the role you were cast in. It asks you to sit with the discomfort of being misunderstood, of disappointing people you care about, of standing alone in your truth. But what you gain in return is everything: peace, agency, authenticity. And perhaps most importantly, the ability to build relationships based not on control, but on mutual respect. Letting go of the need for approval is one of the hardest and most liberating steps you'll ever take. Approval was the currency in your family. You learned that being loved meant being chosen, and being chosen meant performing. But love doesn't require performance. It doesn't demand you lose yourself to be accepted. Real love says, you don't have to become someone else to belong here. If that's not the message you received, then it's time to start giving it to yourself. Because family may have shaped your beginning, but it doesn't get to define your becoming. Control has no place in love. And once you understand that, you begin the work of breaking the cycle for yourself and for those who come after you. One of the most painful realizations many people come to in adulthood is that loyalty to family is often weaponized to keep them in places that harm them. It's taught early, through repeated messages like family comes first, blood is thicker than water, and you don't turn your back on your own. These phrases sound noble on the surface, but in dysfunctional systems, they become tools of emotional manipulation. They're used not to encourage connection, but to demand silence. They don't promote love, they promote obligation. And that obligation often asks you to betray yourself in order to stay in good standing with people who continually dismiss, hurt, or control you. In healthy families, loyalty is mutual. It's built on respect, emotional safety, and accountability. But in toxic family dynamics, loyalty is one-directional. You're expected to show up no matter what. You're expected to forgive without an apology. You're expected to keep secrets that are rotting you from the inside. And when you push back, even gently, you're labeled as dramatic, ungrateful, or disloyal. That's not loyalty. That's emotional servitude disguised as love. It's a system where the cost of belonging is silence, compliance, and the suppression of your own needs. This kind of false loyalty is especially hard to untangle because it's tied to your identity. From childhood, many people are raised to believe that to question their family is to question their own worth. You're told that family is everything, and you internalize that message so deeply that even when your family is the source of your deepest wounds, walking away from them feels like walking away from yourself. That's how the cycle continues. People stay in relationships that diminish them because they fear what it means to leave. They fear being alone. They fear being judged. But most of all, they fear being the one who broke the illusion that everything was okay. There's a deep grief that comes with realizing your loyalty was never valued for what it truly was. You gave your love, your time, your energy. You gave the benefit of the doubt over and over again. You tried to see the best in people who never saw the best in you. And when you finally set a boundary or spoke your truth, the response wasn't care or concern, it was punishment. The moment you stopped playing the role, you became the villain. That kind of betrayal is hard to describe. It leaves you questioning your judgment, your worth, and your entire history. Because when the people you've defended the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest, it shatters something inside you. That moment, painful as it is the beginning of freedom. It's the point where you start to see that love without respect is not love. That obligation without mutual care is not loyalty. That peace built on suppression is not peace. It's a slow erosion of self. You start to understand that family isn't defined by blood alone. It's defined by behavior, by presence, by safety. It's defined by how people make you feel, not just in their best moments, but in their worst. Breaking away from toxic loyalty doesn't mean cutting everyone off. It means choosing yourself without guilt. It means no longer sacrificing your mental health to keep the family mythology intact. It means recognizing that love does not require your suffering. You are not a bad daughter, son, sibling, or cousin for saying no to emotional manipulation. You are not disloyal for protecting your peace. You are not selfish for demanding mutual respect. You begin to love yourself enough to step away from those who consistently hurt you. You give others permission to do the same. You begin to challenge the generational patterns that have been passed down. Patterns that say endurance is strength, silence is noble, and self-sacrifice is love. But real strength is breaking the silence. Real nobility is honoring your truth. And real love includes you in its definition. Many people fear what others will say when they start choosing themselves. But the people who genuinely love you will not make you feel guilty for doing what you need to heal. The ones who do were never invested in your well-being. They were invested in your compliance. And that distinction matters. It helps you stop taking things personally. It helps you stop twisting yourself into someone you're not just to earn approval that was always conditional. Loyalty is a beautiful thing when it's rooted in reciprocity. But loyalty that demands you stay silent, small, or broken is not loyalty. It's control. And healing often begins the moment you allow yourself to tell the truth, even if your voice shakes, even if you're the only one saying it. Because sometimes the most loyal thing you can do is to break the cycle, not just for you, but for everyone still trapped in it. You're not abandoning your family when you step away from dysfunction. You're abandoning the illusion that your suffering is required to keep the family together, and that might be the most courageous act of love you ever choose. One of the most overlooked truths in family dynamics is that healing can be lonely, especially when you're the first one in the family to do it. When you start the work, when you go to therapy, learn to set boundaries, speak your truth, and unlearn toxic patterns, you begin to see things more clearly. You start noticing the subtle emotional manipulation, the buried resentments, the unspoken rules, the cycles that repeat through generations. You can't unsee them, but what you often find is that your awakening is not celebrated. It's resisted, ignored, or even ridiculed, because healing changes you, and change disrupts comfort. When you become more conscious, more aware, more honest, it threatens the very structure your family may still be clinging to. Families often build their identities around survival strategies shaped by pain, trauma, and dysfunction. Whether it's emotional suppression, avoidance, denial, or guilt, these patterns can go unnoticed for decades. They become so ingrained that they feel normal. So when one person begins to question them, it feels like a betrayal. You're no longer laughing at the same jokes. You're no longer willing to tolerate the same behaviors. You're not playing along. And in a system built on unspoken rules, breaking even one of them can make you feel like you're breaking the whole family apart. There's a unique kind of isolation that comes when your healing journey sets you apart from the people you love most. You may start to feel like a stranger at family gatherings. Conversations become awkward. Your silence is read as judgment. Your words are taken as criticism. You're told you've changed, and not always in a good way. The irony is, they're right. You have changed. You've grown. You've stopped people-pleasing. You've started honoring your limits. You've begun to live in alignment with your values. But instead of being met with curiosity or support, you're often met with distance or resistance, because your healing shines a light on what others aren't ready to face. You start to realize that healing isn't just about you, it's about what your healing exposes. When you stop accepting emotional scraps, it forces others to confront how little they were offering. When you say no to drama or manipulation, it reveals how much those behaviors were normalized. When you no longer tolerate being silenced, it threatens those who benefited from your silence. And the people who aren't ready to face those truths may reject you not because you're wrong, but because you're a mirror. And not everyone wants to look into a mirror that shows them what they've avoided for years. This can be incredibly painful. There's grief and healing that no one prepares you for. You grieve the version of your family you believed in. You grieve the closeness that now feels like distance. You grieve the comfort of being accepted, even if that acceptance came at the cost of your authenticity. And you grieve the realization that not everyone you love will walk this journey with you. That's the hardest part. Not everyone is meant to come with you. Some will stay exactly where they are, and you'll have to let them. There's also guilt. You may question whether you're being too harsh or too sensitive. You may wonder if it would be easier to just go back to how things were, to keep the peace, to bite your tongue. But the truth is, healing demands integrity. And integrity doesn't mean being perfect. It means being honest. It means making choices that align with your truth, even when they cost you approval. It means choosing discomfort over betrayal, especially self-betrayal. You can't heal while pretending. You can't grow while shrinking. You can't love others well if it requires abandoning yourself. Something shifts. You begin to make peace with the loneliness. You realize it's not a punishment, it's a part of the process. You learn to sit with the discomfort of being misunderstood, and you stop needing to be validated by those who never tried to understand you. You begin to create a new kind of family, one built on emotional safety, respect, and mutual support. Sometimes these people are blood relatives, sometimes they're not. But what they all share is a willingness to meet you where you are, without trying to pull you back to who you used to be. Healing often feels like losing everything before you gain anything, but what you gain is real. You gain clarity. You gain freedom. You gain the ability to respond instead of react. You learn how to be in relationship without losing yourself.
You stop performing. You stop apologizing for existing. You start honoring your own needs without shame. And even though it's lonely at first, that loneliness becomes the space where you finally meet yourself. Not the version others shaped, but the version that's always been there waiting to be seen. Being the cycle breaker in a family is not glamorous. It's hard, it's lonely, and it's often thankless. But it's also one of the most courageous things a person can do. Because every time you choose healing, you plant a seed that might grow in the next generation, a seed that might bloom in someone watching you from the sidelines, a seed that proves healing is possible even in the most broken systems. And that seed, that possibility, is how cycles end and new legacies begin. Breaking free from toxic family dynamics is not an act of betrayal, it's an act of self-respect. The dark side of blood ties teaches us that just because someone is family doesn't mean they are safe, kind, or entitled to our presence. We are conditioned to believe that loyalty means tolerance, that love means endurance, and that silence is a virtue. But healing demands truth. It demands boundaries. It demands the courage to redefine love not as something we suffer for, but something we deserve without condition. Choosing your mental and emotional well-being over the comfort of dysfunction is never easy, especially when it goes against everything you've been taught. But it's how cycles are broken. It's how new, healthier patterns are born. You may lose people along the way. You may grieve relationships you once clung to. But what you gain is immeasurable. Peace, clarity, wholeness, and the unshakable truth that your worth is not defined by your ability to carry pain in silence. Your story can end differently. You get to choose what comes next.